Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining today. Hope you're all having a good afternoon. If it's anything like, if it is in Lincoln, it's interesting outside, but hopefully you're staying warm inside. I'll just pause for a little bit just so that everybody can get joined up here, and we'll get going in 30 seconds or a minute here, and we'll start up. Okay, hopefully as people continue to join the WebEx, we'll just be able to dive right into what we're talking about. So thank you all again for joining today. I appreciate you all taking the time to attend this webinar. We hope to provide some updates today on some of our BEAD activities, and if you've seen the agenda, provide some kind of an overview of the Department of Treasury Capital Projects Fund grant program that we're administering. That's not directly tied to BEAD, but they're related in some ways, and we'll provide an overview of that program and some of the new changes that are part of that program. First off, I want to just do a couple of housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be made available on both the broadband.nebraska.gov website and the Public Service Commission's website. So we'll hopefully get that up as soon as possible after we end the webinar. It usually takes us a little bit of time to get that turned around, but we hope to do that as quickly as possible. I would expect that we'll probably have some extra time today, and so we've tried to build in some time for Q&A if there are questions that people have. We ask that you either put that in the chat box, or we will also try to look for raised hands at the end if you want to ask your question in person. Final thing that I want to talk about just from a housekeeping perspective. First, it's an apology. If some of you received a strange email late in the day yesterday from me with kind of a cryptic message, that was me trying to get our listserv in order, and was trying to run a test message, and unfortunately it got sent out to the entire listserv. So if you did receive that message, I guess that's just a heads up that you are on the listserv at this point. We're trying to put that together to make communications a little bit easier, and we should have that pretty well straightened out and operational essentially now. One thing I do want to mention about the listserv, there will be options on that to unsubscribe if you aren't interested in receiving those emails. Hopefully, by virtue of the fact that you're on this call, that you do want to see those emails. But if not, there will be an option to unsubscribe. And then there's also an option to subscribe. So in the event that you forward those emails to others, they will have the opportunity to add their email address to that listserv. One more note on the listserv. On the broadband.nebraska.gov website, there's also a way to subscribe on that website. And just a note that we will incorporate individuals that subscribe on that website into our listserv as well. So a heads up on that. Okay. Another just a review of the agenda today. We'll go over some of the future meeting plans here shortly. We'll review some of the information from last month's webinar quickly, and we'll turn it over to Patrick Redmond to give us kind of an overview and introduction to the broadband office. We'll talk about some of the mapping challenge updates and state broadband map, and then Carrie Gans will go through the Capital Projects Fund overview. And then after that, we'll do some Q&A if people have questions at that point. I just wanted to kind of reiterate some of the stuff that we went over last month, namely that, you know, there's kind of a timeline and a clock that's actively ticking on some of our BEAD milestones. You can see some of the dates that have already passed, where the NTIA released the BEAD Notice of Funding Opportunity. The FCC in November released the National Broadband Map. We talked quite a bit about that in last month's webinar. And that on January 13th, so last Friday, that was effectively the soft deadline for submitting availability challenges to the FCC's broadband map. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute as well. And then we expect on or about the 30th of June that the NTIA will make some final announcements and determinations on BEAD allocations. And then we expect just a rough timeline, you'll see there on the screen, between 2024 and 2028 is when we implement most of the programs and plans for BEAD in terms of actually administering funding for broadband deployment. A couple other important deadlines that I just wanted to bring up. We talked about this again last month, but we expect that about August 12th will be the deadline for the 5-year action plan that we are responsible for generating and submitting to the NTIA. That plan includes a number of things that we need to address, and that's kind of what the goal of our outreach activities will be in the coming months, is helping to inform various aspects of that plan. And then December, on or about late December, we expect that our initial proposal will be due to the NTIA. That's actually a clock that starts once the NTIA makes notices of funding announcements. And that initial proposal is kind of a more detailed description of how we plan to allocate funding for broadband deployment. A couple other notes there, just that there's after we submit that initial proposal, there is a challenge process that we will undergo that helps make some further determinations on what's eligible and ineligible for funding. So a couple of deadlines there, are dates just to keep in mind. And then on or about February of so within about a year, when the initial proposal is approved, we have a final proposal that's due to the NTIA. So these are probably things that we'll continue to just mention in passing as we go along through these updates and through some of our planning processes. We've set on our calendar the dates for the next 2 webinars. We plan to hold these kind of update webinars on a monthly basis. And it kind of just so happens that the 22nd in both February and March lands on a Wednesday. So that seems to work pretty well for scheduling those webinars for the next 2 months. We will continue to keep them at 2:00 p.m. Central Time. And we'll look to schedule ones past that, but you'll see that in some of our upcoming meetings. We'll set the dates for those. All right, with that, I want to kind of introduce Patrick Redmond. He's the Interim Director of the Nebraska Broadband Office. And Patrick, I see you're on screen there. Thank you for joining us. And I'll just let you take it away if you want to there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Colin. I very much appreciate the introduction. As you said, I'm the Interim Director for the newly created Broadband Office. Once we do actually find our director through our search process, then I will still be a part of the Broadband Office, but I'll be in a smaller capacity at least. So just to give you guys a brief background on the creation of the Broadband Office, which is now on the screen here. This is the public announcement that accompanied the executive order, which was launched on January 6th. And effectively, the Broadband Office will be the tip of the spear for the governor's policy vision concerning broadband. This move was made to solidify the position of broadband coordinator and then also provide administrative support for that position, which was in congruence with a lot of public sentiment ideas that we heard at the hearing in December, and it's been stakeholder sentiment since probably around September, August, that we have an established broadband office along with 100% time devoted broadband coordinator position. So Governor Pillen came in and signed this executive order pretty much on the day one of his administration, and this was this executive order was made to show his commitment to bring affordable, accessible, dependable, and high-speed broadband to all Nebraskans across the state. As far as the specifics on the, as far as the specifics on the broadband office, we are still working out the administrative kinks. But what I can say now is the goal of it is, again, to represent the governor's vision and be an administrative point by which the state can operate with other agencies such as the PSC, with Cullen, for example. So it's a much more solidified version of what we've been seeing so far from the Connect Nebraska Working Group. It provides a house for us to have our administrative support, and it's currently going to be housed in the Department of Transportation for administrative and budgetary purposes. Outside of that, we are just getting off the ground with the office. We've only been in discussions of this since the 6th. So, and due to the weather and variety of other circumstances with session starting up, we haven't been able to get too deep into the nitty gritty, but we are having meetings with senators to discuss exactly how it's going to operate on the executive branch and what coordination we can have between us and the legislature. So that's what I've got as far as a brief overview and brief introduction. We'll have more information, coming forthwith with our monthly webinars, as well as our biweekly updates that we send out both and also post on the broadband.nebraska.gov website. So as we get more information, we'll make that publicly available, and I'm sure you'll see bills of some sort dropping, dealing with the office or things of that nature coming down the line. But at this moment in time, that's what I've got for a general overview and a brief introduction. So I'll kick it back to you, Colin. Thanks.
Thanks. I appreciate it, Patrick. Thanks for taking the time to give us the overview of that office. We'll move on to some of our broadband map update information. Let me see. So the first thing I want to give us kind of an update on is the challenge to the FCC's broadband map. Just want to kind of announce that we did submit prior to the January 13th deadline challenges to, you'll see the number there, over 1 million locations in Nebraska. Predominantly our challenges were to locations where carriers reported licensed fixed wireless at 25.3 or greater. We submitted, like I said, quite a large number of challenges, and at this point, we have been notified by the FCC that some of those challenges will not be advanced to the carrier, but a significant portion of them will be advanced to the carrier, which essentially means that the carrier and us, the challenger, have a period to work towards a resolution. If no resolution is arrived at during that time, then I believe the FCC adjudicates those decisions themselves. But at this point, we're sort of in that, I'll just kind of call it a back and forth period where the carriers work with us towards resolving those challenges. There's a bullet point there that kind of states that looking through the data that was submitted on the FCC broadband map, there are potentially 43,000 locations that would become unserved if our challenges are successful, and would therefore potentially be part of our allocation of funding for BEAD, and probably more importantly, be eligible for broadband deployment in through the BEAD program. So we really want to try and nail down the locations in Nebraska that definitely unquestionably need broadband and that are unserved by virtually any definition at this point. So just a heads up that we've submitted those challenges. We look forward to working through the process of getting all those resolved, and hopefully that will work towards securing some funding that's much needed for Nebraska. This was in our presentation last month, but just a quick overview, just a quick review of some of the existing mapping resources. The FCC broadband map is kind of in the middle there, but one thing I did want to mention is that individuals are still able to submit challenges to the FCC broadband map, and even availability challenges. It's still possible, maybe even likely, that if availability challenges are submitted at this point, that they could be resolved in time for the NTIA to use that information in their determination of funding for BEAD. The January 13th deadline I referred to before is kind of a soft deadline. That's predominantly because if the maximum time were required to work through all these challenges, January 13th was kind of the deadline for getting challenges submitted, so that entire time could elapse so that the determination could be made. But in the event that the challenges are a little more easy to adjudicate and take less than the full length of time envisioned by the FCC, then there's still opportunities for challenges of availability to be made. The other resources listed there are just the broadband website. There's some good mapping information on the broadband.nebraska.gov website, and then the Public Service Commission's 2 broadband related maps that we make publicly available are listed on their as well. The Nebraska broadband map, which is kind of a real broad overview of all of the broadband activities and PSC activities related to NUSF and broadband, that you can kind of see a summary of all that information on that broadband map. And then the bridge map is really Nebraska Broadband Bridge Grant Program specific, where you can really drill down into the first 2 years of the Nebraska Broadband Bridge Program. So with that, I will turn it over to Carrie Gans. She's the Assistant Director of Telecom and NUSF here with Public Service Commission, and she's going to give an overview of the Capital Projects Fund as we are working to administer that. Go ahead, Carrie.
Thank you, Colin. As Colin mentioned, my name is Carrie Gans. I'm the Assistant Telecommunications Director at the Public Service Commission. In the next several slides, I'll provide kind of a general overview of the Capital Projects Fund broadband grant cycle that was recently launched by the Commission. I will say that I recommend, this is just a general overview, so I recommend if you have more interest in the details of the program to take a look at the CPF1 order, program guide and application, which are all available on our website. The CPF1 order was issued on January 10th, 2023, and those are all now posted on our website for public viewing. So just kind of a quick overview, and we did kind of go over this slide, I think, in the last webinar that we had for Capital Projects Fund. The funding agency for this particular grant program is the U.S. Department of Treasury. It was established by ARPA, and Nebraska was allocated $128.7 million. In LB 1024, that allocation was further separated out by congressional district. So $40 million, or at least $40 million, was allocated to Congressional District 1 for broadband deployment projects, and another at least $40 million of that was allocated to Congressional District 3 for broadband deployment projects, with a slight caveat that the legislative bill indicated that those grant dollars would need to go for eligible projects in cities of the second class and villages. And then no more than $35 million of that amount was allocated to Congressional District 2 to be used for multi-purpose community facilities. For the first two bullets there, District 1 and District 3. In August of 2022, August 30th, we received approval from Treasury, essentially, that for $87.7 million in funding for the broadband deployment portion of that for congressional districts 1 and 3. And so in partnership with the Nebraska Department of Economic Development, the Public Service Commission will work to administer the grant application process for the broadband projects with funds allocated to those two districts through a modified version of the Nebraska Broadband Bridge Program. So, and this is just a quick map of the Nebraska congressional districts, just so you kind of can see where the funding's going. District 1 is shown there in light blue. District 2 is the white section, and then District 3 is that orange section of the state. So, all right. So, just kind of this is all still relevant from previous Nebraska Broadband Bridge grant cycles. So a lot of this may look familiar to a lot of you if you're familiar with the Broadband Bridge program. The program requires a minimum 100 megabits per second speeds for any projects that are applied for grant funding through this program. And grant recipients that are awarded grant dollars through this program, they must meet speed testing requirements post-deployment to show that they've met the required speeds. The program does prioritize unserved over underserved project areas, and basically what that means is that we'll essentially put them into tiers. Sections. So the first tier is going to be, or the first priority would be, a project in an area that has unserved locations. And unserved means an area or a location that has less than 25.3 megabits per second service availability. And then second priority would be those unserved areas, but that have also been receiving that have received federal support, but that would not be completed within 24 months after a grant application deadline. And then the third tier, the third priority, would be those underserved areas. And those underserved are defined as areas that have less than 120 megabits per second service. So eligible applicants for the program, this is unchanged from previous grant cycles through the Broadband Bridge program, essentially, but eligible applicants would be any internet service provider, including any telecommunications company, cable television company, wireless network provider that can provide broadband internet service. Also, a cooperative, a political subdivision, or a tribal government can apply as an applicant for this program. But any applications coming from a political subdivision or tribal government would need to be made as part of a public-private partnership with a broadband internet service provider. A few other things to note with the Capital Projects Fund, and these are continued again from Broadband Bridge program, but applicants do have to show that they're capable of providing the service. They have to show a demonstrated history. We also score them on financial, technical, and legal capability. Another thing, applicants have to provide details on the rates to be assessed. And they do get points awarded if they are within a benchmark rate. Affordability is an important component of the program, and we want to make sure that that any service provided through these grant dollars is affordable to the individuals that are in those communities. Applicants have to provide GIS shapefiles that show the project area and GIS shapefiles that show the locations to be served. That includes GIS shapefiles specific to fixed wireless deployments. There is a challenge process in place to allow providers that either have service or are in the process of building service within a project area to intervene in an application if their build-outs are overlapping those areas. A few things that are kind of new or revised for this capital projects fund specific grant cycle. There is no match requirement. We did have match requirements in previous rounds for Broadband Bridge, but with this specific grant cycle, there is no match requirement. However, applicants proposing to provide a match could receive additional scoring points for doing so. Projects proposing broadband deployment on tribal lands are required to provide documented approval of the project by relevant tribal government to the PSC by a specific date within the process. Projects proposing fixed wireless technology are required to submit supplemental information to more clearly define the project area and to demonstrate the speed capability of the proposed technology. A couple other things that are new for this program cycle. All applications must include a digital inclusion plan. The plan needs to contain details as to how the project will be tailored to meet the needs of the community and must consider affordability, among other things. All participants within the Capital Projects Fund must agree to participate in FCC's Affordable Connectivity Program subsidy program, or any subsequent subsidy program that's identified by the Department of Treasury, and they must agree to participate in those programs for as long as the funded broadband infrastructure is in use. There are some community outreach requirements that are new for this grant cycle. Applicants are required to engage in community outreach, and communities will be asked to provide feedback to the Commission on proposed projects. The Commission may investigate any negative feedback and would look to potentially work with the applicant and community leaders to find possible solutions, and or if an application is receiving negative feedback, that application could receive scoring deductions. It just depends upon the nature of the feedback. There are some added federal compliance requirements post-award. So after the grants are announced, applicants are required to sign and submit a subaward attestation and agreement and a civil rights compliance attestation and agreement. These items include things such as added reporting requirements, drug-free workplace policies, records retention, civil rights compliance. A lot of these are, these are based on federal compliance requirements for the use of federal funding dollars. So just to kind of go over a few key dates, as I mentioned before, the CPF1 order was entered on Tuesday, January 10th. We do have a workshop coming up next week for potential applicants and partners that are interested in learning more about the Capital Projects Fund program and the changes and the application process. And that will be on Tuesday, January 24th at 11 o'clock a.m. We will be having that as kind of a hybrid meeting. We'll have it in the PSC hearing room, and also that will be available for streaming online for participants. The application window for the Capital Projects Fund grant cycle, that window opens on Thursday, February 9th. The application is on our website currently, but that's when we'll begin to start accepting applications. Applications are due by Friday, February 24th, 2023. We expect after a review process, there's a number of other dates built into this. This is just, again, just a few key dates, but there's a challenge process and a number of other dates kind of built in there, but grant awards are expected to be announced in June of 2023. All right. And for more information, there's some contact information up there. Patrick Redmond was on earlier in the call, so there's his contact information there. Ann Byers is our digital equity manager for, she's with NITC, OCIO, and she's doing the digital equity piece of the NTIA grant. Colin Robbins is Director of Communications, the Public Service Commission. His contact information is there, and my contact information is there as well. So I'll
Thanks,
go ahead and
Carrie.
turn it back to Colin.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Just One more thing I wanted to mention really quick before we kind of turn it over to anybody that has questions. I kind of skipped over one thing earlier, and that was a personnel updates. I did want to kind of let people know that we did identify an outreach coordinator. So we believe that person will be in place in early February. So we're looking forward to having that position filled, and there are still open job positions right now. So if there are people that have an interest or want to spread the word about those positions, you should be able to find those on the state's job website, and you can probably find links to those on our Nebraska Public Service Commission website as well. So with that, that covers the agenda items that we wanted to discuss, but we're certainly open to questions that anybody might have on anything BEAD related. So as we mentioned before, either please put something in the chat box, or do the hand raise function on the WebEx, and we will turn it over to you. And I'm seeing one question come in on capital projects funds and the services required to be provided. And the question is, just for clarification, ISPs are required to provide 100 by 100 services for capital projects funds. That's the question. And to clarify, yes, that is correct. 100 by 100 megabits per second is the speed requirement for projects approved through the capital projects funds. There's a question in the chat box about when do we expect challenges to be advanced by the FCC. Let's see. So I think some of the bulk challenges that Nebraska submitted, that we submitted, were some of the earlier challenges that were received by the FCC. So some of those have already been advanced to the carrier. I don't know if you're asking about an ultimate resolution to the challenges. I'm not sure that that's been determined yet, other than there's approximately like 120 days before a decision has to be made. So right now, again, we're kind of in the resolution phase of challenges that were submitted to the FCC. And I would expect that within a few months, there will be determinations on essentially any challenge that's been submitted to this point. There's a question in the chat box: is one of the federal attestation requirements Davis-Bacon wage rates? That's a really good question, and I would have to go back and look. I don't have an encyclopedic memory of our attestation agreement at this point, but I'm not sure if Carrie, if you know that, or if maybe Shanna, if you have any background on that. I don't remember, but we can follow up with that.
I think the wage requirements start at grants of 5 million or more. Then we need to start reporting on the Davis-Bacon wage rates, as well as other prevailing wage and other requirements. So that would apply to grants in excess of $5 million.
Thank you, Shanna. Appreciate that. There's a question, received a question about whether there are any updates on the, so maybe just a background. There's a question about an update on the 100-person limit for definition of a village. And that's a very good question. That was something that was brought to our attention. So just a little background for the purposes of capital projects funds. We mentioned in our order that we pulled the definition for villages from state statute, which mentioned population between, I think it was 100 and 5,000. It was later brought to our attention that the definition of villages in Nebraska may be slightly broader than that. So we are working to provide some clarification on what we consider villages for the purposes of capital projects funds. So appreciate that question, and I think we'll have some guidance, further guidance on that for capital projects funds applicants soon. There's a question about, will Nebraska tribes be required to go through the same application process? One thing Carrie did mention is that tribes have to identify a carrier partner in order to submit an application for, and I assume the question is with respect to capital projects funds, but essentially the answer to the question about the application process is it will be the same as every other applicant, except that if you're part of a partnership, then there are there's some information that has to be submitted to kind of show us that the partnership does exist. So it is essentially the same process, though. Next question in the chat box says, in determining project eligibility, should applicants use the Nebraska Broadband Mapping Project Map, the new FCC data map, or both? If an area shows as unserved on one map and served on the other, should the area be considered served? So it's essentially a question about what, I'll interpret the question as asking how we're making determinations for what areas are unserved and underserved for the purposes of grants, for example. The short answer is we provide the information on our Nebraska broadband map as a very general guideline. We will rely on other sources of data to confirm whether an area truly is unserved or underserved. So when we receive applications that claim to serve only locations that are unserved, we will double check that against essentially every data source at our disposal, including the new FCC broadband map, including sources of speed test data that we have available. And we're basically checking to see if, for example, if there's a speed test that someone has run within the project area that's clearly over 25.3 on a service that we can identify, then clearly it doesn't fit into that definition of unserved. So I guess that's just to say that I would rely on the most current data available, which is probably the FCC broadband map, to identify which areas are unserved, but we don't restrict ourselves only to that data source when we're evaluating applications. So just be aware of that. And so I'm not seeing any hands up, and it appears that things have slowed down in the chat box. So I'll just maybe talk here for another 30 seconds or so, just to give people an opportunity if there are other questions. But again, just to reiterate some of the things we said, we plan on having kind of monthly update meetings in this format. I do want to mention that there will be other outreach activities that we will be undertaking in the coming months that will be scheduled ahead of time, but they have not yet been scheduled. So just an awareness that as we dive into some of the more granular topics with respect to BEAD planning, that those type of meetings will be scheduled kind of on a one-off basis. Some of them we plan on having in person, but some of them may happen via WebEx too. It just kind of depends on the specifics of the topic that we plan to address. So with that, I don't see any other items in the chat box. And one more came in there just light, so I'll answer a couple things there really quick. There's a question about, does the state have a system to send open trench notifications to others when projects are being built? And there's a statement, could be useful to joint trench where possible. I guess the succinct answer to that first part is we don't have a system to kind of to notify others when projects are being built. The only thing I'll say kind of along those lines is that we do make the information about the applications that are submitted and the locations that are proposed to be addressed through applications available on our mapping website. So at the very least, you could have some idea of where projects are happening. And once we've gone through the applications and made decisions on grant awards, we modify that information so that the grant award areas and locations are shown. So hopefully that will give people some idea of where there might be opportunities for joint trenching, for example. So, and then looks like Tom Rolfus, our NTIA Federal Program Officer, or FPO, added his information in there as a resource, and he's definitely been a resource for the Connect Nebraska group, and just wanted to mention his name, that he is certainly a resource in all of these efforts and activities. So thanks, Tom, for adding that in there. And with that, I think we'll close out the meeting. I appreciate your time. Again, hopefully everybody's staying warm and safe, and staying out of the storm if you're in Nebraska. So thank you all for your time, and hopefully you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.